After removing the Buck Hunter control deck, let's flip that over and see what we get. We're going to have to do a little bit of work here, opening things up. You'll need a smaller screwdriver for these screws in here. A little bit smaller than normal. Get that plastic cover off, and that will release these cables. We'll now take these little plastic clips off. They come off fairly easily. They may break. And now the full cable can be pulled through that hole. At this point, you can easily take the plastic cover off as well, and we'll see about using that later. So now we'll proceed taking the rest of the screws out and see what we got inside. We will be replacing this plastic because the gun holsters are part of it. So keep the screws and try not to break anything. Two, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. That means there's one more. So 12 screws in all. And then we should be able to pop this cover off. Be careful, there's a wire attached here for sound, which we are going to reuse. So just leave this attached. You can see in here it's pretty straightforward. We've only got a couple buttons, obviously, and that's about it. So we are going to disconnect these buttons from the board. Here's the power switch here. It's underneath. And we have the green player button and the orange player button. The green is plugged into the blue. And then we also have the volume control right here. There we go. They're all unplugged. 2 screws. And we will reuse those as well. Encoder board is off. So now we take our Buck Hunter encoder board, and we're simply going to plug everything in as appropriate. So the volume switch, 3-pin connector, fits right into the volume socket. The power switch is red, and so is the power switch on the encoder board. So and then green is player 1 start. It's on this side of the board. It's not color coded, but it is labeled. There's lots of extra buttons on here. If you were to add buttons to your deck, you could. And player 2 start, the orange, is right here. There's also coin buttons, there's also A buttons, but we have very few to work with the stock Buck Hunter, so we're doing it that way. So I can see I made one mistake. I'm going to leave the volume disconnected for now. I think I'm going to try to loop it around the other way. Instead, I'm going to use the same screws that we just took off the encoder board and screw our new encoder board into place. Tighten them snugly, don't over tighten, you don't want to crack the board, but there we go. Now we have the option to plug in the volume from this side. It's quite tight, probably not an issue either way, but I'm going to do it that way. There's also on this encoder board, there's also a joystick connector for directions if you want to add a joystick. We're just working with stock controls, so we're not going to add any buttons at this point. There are a few more wires and cables we want to connect before we close this back up. One is the speaker connector cable. This will come in your kit. It's labeled where the speakers plug in. On the encoder board, there is a connector that plugs in right here. We also supply an audio cable, and this will be attached to the HDMI board, and it's labeled HDMI board on that side. On this side, it will be for the encoder, and we'll plug that in right there. You also receive a USB cable, and we will be plugging the USB-C end of that into the encoder board. The only other cable is the harness cable that we use in all of our mods, and that plugs in right here. Now that all the cords are in there and they're all pointing in a downward direction, we're going to tie them together so that in the end they can all turn and go up this direction. You're going to see why. We have to be sure to keep these three posts clear, otherwise you'll never get the cover to go back together. So we're going to try to loop everything together like that. So we are going to take all the cables out that direction. There's one more in the USB. So we have included some zip ties in the kit. You're going to want to get them roughly in the right position and start to bring them together like that. Turning sharply with a little bit of slack so that we can work with them. We also want to try to get the speaker cable and this one attached as well, just to keep them from causing problem. So we are going to add one more zip tie here. Just kept them loose for now in case I need to alter it a little bit. So you can see that the cables are now pretty nice and neat, pointing out straight through there. So the idea being is we're going to insert the cables through this slot so that we can close it back up again. Start with the longest cable, which is the USB-C cable, the long white one. So that one gets in the way. Just do one cable at a time. Speaker's cable is probably the second longest. Pull that one through, and then just do the rest of them. The marquee cable is the shortest. It's the power in cable. And the marquee. So they're all through there. As you can see, it's all nicely organized, all staying away from these posts, so we can begin to close it up. Speaker cable has a has a tie in it, so it'll hold itself. As you close it up, pull the excess slack out, and you just have to jiggle it around a little. And of course, those 3 posts we talked about need to find their way. Screw holes on the deck will guide you a little bit in terms of where we're trying to get to. There we go. Slid it over into place so it is flat on the deck. Nicely into position. So we're going to quickly get a couple screws in here. There you go. So it is a thick wad of cables coming out of there, but it does fit. You do want to try to keep this as flush as possible. We'll put the rest of the screws in, but our suggestion will be to run some tests on this first before we screw all 10 screws in and make sure everything's working properly. Hooking up the control deck and the retro shooter mod is the same whether you're testing it like we are right now or it's the final install. We've replaced the deck, we've let the cables come through that we've installed, and now we just need to connect them up. Let's start with the speaker wire. It comes out of the control deck and it plugs into the wire that is conveniently marked speakers. So those just simply plug together. It's done. There is a marquee wire here, which will be useless to you since there is no light up marquee in Big Buck Hunter, unless you get a mod from Retro 530 or someone that might have lit it up for you. Plug marks to the 3-way Y cable needs to be plugged in to the other cable that comes with your kit. So blue goes to blue. This one's going to go to the retro shooter console. This one goes to the IR modules, and this one goes to the HDMI board. So we're going to power the HDMI board there, and we'll leave the other connectors for now. The other white cable is our audio cable that plugs into, as it says, HDMI board into the audio jack. We also have the HDMI cable from Retro Shooter's kit. We're going to plug that into the HDMI board, and we'll save that to plug into the Retro Shooter in a moment. The only other thing to do while we're here is to wire up the IR modules. We're doing this on a 19-inch screen upgrade with the integrated IR modules, all 4 of them. If you are using your stock screen, you'll have to mount them on the front and of course convert your PCB to an HDMI board. We have lots of videos for that on our other mods. We will link some in this description below. So you won't see these top ones, but I will just plug them in quickly. There we go, they are all connected. So the IR modules cable is green, needs to plug into that to power it. If you're using a retro shooter with only 2 IRs, you got yours before November shipments changed to 4, then you would just, of course, not plug in 2 of them. The rest of the connectors go into the actual retro shooter console itself. We have an optional holder that you can purchase, and you can screw that down and hold this nicely in place. If you don't want to do it that way, you can simply just let it rest at the bottom of the cabinet. All the cables are long enough to allow that to happen. So we have HDMI, plugs into HDMI. We have the retro shooter power, which plugs right beside the HDMI, like that. The USB cable obviously plugs into one of these. since we're just testing it for now, we're just going to simply plug in the two guns. We're not going to install them properly into the holsters. We'll see that in a few minutes. We just want to make sure everything's working properly before we go any further. So the only other connection is the actual power. Use the retro shooter power cable. You can run it through the door with that extra cable that goes through the power cable that goes through the door normally, or in my case, I'm just going to simply plug it in where it says power in, and we'll get our 12 volts into the cab and turn it on and see what happens. So everything's just temporarily held on here for now so that we can test it and make sure everything's working properly. The retro shooter is booting up. Okay, there we've booted into the menu. Let's take a look at the gun. So that is a good sign. We can navigate. Let's test the volume, make sure that's working right. So as I hold it going up, it's getting louder. As I hold it down, it's getting softer, all the way to be off. Get it to a nice level. There you go. So stock speaker, stock volume control, stock on and off switch. Everything's working great. This is start for player one, which will put us into the menu. You're going to want to hide everything but light gun games on this one, unless you plug in some controllers, because there's very limited controls. However, as you can see, got start on here, got everything else on the gun. We can launch. Boots up. You can see we have some control, so that's a good sign. We have not calibrated, so we're going to do that first. You can hold start on the gun, or you can hold start on the control deck. Both will get you into light gun settings. And we'll stand in a comfortable position. It's actually pretty good already. Very nice. With the 4 sensors, you can go a long ways away at quite nice angles. I'm still tracking quite well from a ridiculous position. And I can go way back. It's working very well. So again, I can hit the start button for player 2 right here on the panel, or I can just do it from the gun, which is the most convenient. One of the nice things about retro shooters guns is you have full controls on the gun. Not every gun has enough buttons for that. So everything is working. Again, if we want to get out of the game, we can do it from the gun or hold our button down. You will need the gun to actually get to exit, and you actually do need gun number 1 to do that. So we know everything's tested properly. Finish it up. So we can finish almost everything else up from the front. We don't actually need to take this control deck back off, although you're certainly welcome to do it that way if you want to. The next thing we do need to do already is replace the plexi. The guns will sit in these large holsters made for the shotguns, but not very neatly, not very securely. So we have these little holster adapters. Peel the tape off them and simply stick them into place. There's one more part of the holster for the back, which you'll see in a minute, but already you can tell they're going to sit there much nicer. As for the cables, we are including little black clips here. Put that around the USB cord, put the rumble recoil through it. The USB cable will just fit there. Feed them one at a time. Feed the cable a little bit through. Squeeze the little clip together. And there you go. You can make your cable as short and neat as you'd like. So we'll just do that for the other side as well. And then we'll go to the back and check it out. Just a couple more things to do. You'll notice the barrel of the gun is extended quite deep. We don't like how that looks from the front. So we have little barrel plugs. Feel the adhesive and just simply place that. It fits like a glove. Just push it right up into there. Now when you put the gun in, it slides right into place and held nice and firmly, and it looks fantastic from the front. So just do that to the red gun as well, and it looks great. To finish it off, we're going to take the USB cables from the guns, plug it back into the retro shooter console. It does not matter which port you use, so I'm not worried about that. However, with our mod kits, you do not plug the recoil into the shooter box. You can plug the pedals in here if you're going to use the pedals, but do not plug the rumble into there. If you do, the screen will flicker every time you pull the trigger. So we include with our kit the recoil power kit. You will be plugging the recoil into the two connectors that say recoil in. And of course, we're going to tidy all this back up into the cab once we're done. And we also include a switch, which is marked A, and it's marked A. They plug together. So this switch can be mounted on the back of your cab, on the top of your cab, side of your cab, wherever you'd like. Just peel the double-sided tape and stick it on. And this will act as a switch to turn recoil on and off. So very convenient, very easy to do. And it will be powered separately because you're going to use either power supply. It doesn't matter if it is the one that came with the retro shooter or the one that came with your Buck Hunter cab. You're going to plug that AC adapter, one of them, into here. The other one is, of course, plugged into your cab like we went over before. So that gives you separate power for recoil and a switch to turn it on and off. Works great. It's the best way to do it. Final step then is to clean this up a little bit and put the door back on. So standard Arcade1up doors will have a power cable through the panel. This is what you're going to plug into the power in right here. By doing that, you can then simply plug your AC adapter in here or take it out. As for recoil, there is an easy way to deal with that as well, and that is because there's tends to be a hole at the top of these things. If we just run our recoil through there, we can plug it in up top, and all the cables are then nice and clean on the inside of the cab. And this external power supply that we just talked about can be plugged in straight to the wall. So that'll be on the outside of the cable. Everything else will be inside the cab. So do that, close up all nice and clean, and throw it on the riser, and hopefully a riser booster so it's a human height. And then we can try some retro shooter shooting.